Okay, hello everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this lecture that will be presented by Professor Bernd Herzogenrath from Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main. Actually, Bernd is lecturing here for the third time, if I'm not mistaken.
So countless times.
Yeah, many times before, and hopefully many times after this lecture. He will be presenting his talks. And his today's lecture is actually a continuation of the previous one that he gave last year. And it's focused on the concept of joy and mutual aid. Obviously, those anarchistic concepts are somehow interrelated, and in his previous lecture, Bernd explained the relation between mutual aid, joy, in terms of Spinoza, Kropotkin, Deleuze, and Guattari. And his today's talk is gonna be more experimental, inspired by sound theory, visual art, and other artistic experiments. And one of the main objectives of this lecture is to overcome the boundary between human and animal realm and try to extend the concept of mutual aid that spreads out the joy from human realm to realm of living nature, and somehow interconnect them. And it's up to Bernd to explain what he means by that and how he wants to do it. So thank you very much, Bernd, for being with us, and we are very much looking forward to your talk.
Thanks for the introduction, Peter, and thanks to all of you for coming. So it was a bit highbrow, so talking about the human, the non-human realm. So I used that phrase in the introduction, but the thing is that this is more a kind of experimental thing about an art project which I did during Corona, and which I wanted to basically link to that idea of joy, art, and resistance, how that fits together. The non-human will sneak in a certain way, but you will see later. So I will first do just a very short rehash of what I did last time, so that all of you see the connection here, right? Okay, so joy is an act of resistance, art is the joy of resistance. And I have to thank Peter for finding that poem which was on the poster, which I didn't know of, because I took the cue from a post-punk LP which I happen to like immensely, which goes by the title Joy as an Act of Resistance, and I tweaked that a little bit. Okay, so taking my cue from the idea of joy as the anarchistic effect per se, I'd like to include also art into the picture, relating joy and art to an infectious logic, which was at work in a multi-contributor arts project I curated during the various lockdowns in 2020 and 21. So this talk will basically consist of two parts. Part one will be a playfully theoretical introduction, and then in part two I will actually show some of the artifacts that came out of that art project. In my talk here last winter, I had tried to make a case for the parallel, maybe even equivalent, of Spinoza's and Deleuze's idea of joy and Kropotkin's idea of mutual aid. According to Spinoza, there are sad and joyful passions, sad and joyful affects. Sadness, frustration, aggression are those affects and passions that diminish and minimize our power to act. Joy, on the other hand, joyful passions and affects maximize our powers. Power, however, is a complex notion in Spinoza. In his Ethics, Spinoza differentiates between two concepts of power, a differentiation that is largely lost in the English translation. In the Latin, there is potestas, which he uses to denote the sovereign powers of command and authority. And then there is potentia, Spinoza's term for force, strength, creative activity. And even if this is decomplexifying a complex notion, it is potentia, which is the most important power in Spinoza's book, I would say. The one that is maximized by joyful passions and affects, whereas command and authority are rather reactive and sad powers. Sad passions, insofar as they constitute an encounter with something that weakens our power, and thus with what is bad for us, prove far less conducive to the eventual forming of common notions than joyful passions do. Joyful passions promote in us a desire arising from joy. Our feeling of joy expresses an increase in our power, an expanse of our power that propels us out into the world. And is this the increase, this expansion, that propulsion that drives us towards further encounters with things that hopefully continue to agree with our nature in both the part and the whole, and that therefore gives birth to a specific as opposed to general common notion or adequate idea? This is pure Spinoza. We must then form common notions by the very aid of joyful passions. In this picture, joyful passions prove absolutely central to the formation of adequate ideas and thus to the power of reason. And the affirmation of joyful passions allows us to come into our power of acting. My shortcut last time was that Kropotkin's mutual aid is an immensely powerful harbinger of joyful affects, a joyful action and a joyful passion at the same time. And you help in being helped, you create communities and you are part of that. Which makes me see joy as the anarchist affect per se. Just check how often the word joy or enjoyment appears in Kropotkin's book. Against the Hobbesian contract theory of sovereignty, it locates force not in the single compartmentalized individual, like potestas, but in the commune or communism of the individual, in solidarity and mutuality, which is potentia. The title of the recent album of post-punk band Idols reads joy as an act of resistance. And I would even try to make a stronger point, claiming that joy is an act of resistance. Resistance against the drag and sad affects of reactionary control, judgment and critique, desperately trying to solidify things as they are. Deleuze, trying to tackle the question, what is a creative act, comes to the conclusion that there's a close affinity between art and resistance. So art and creativity join forces with joy. Joy in Spinoza's and Kropotkin's sense. Joy as an anarchist affect. And if joy is an act and an art of resistance, then maybe art is the joy of resistance. We'll see if that works. And we all know joy can be infectious. Indeed, we speak of infectious laughter, infectious happiness, and so on. However, during the last few years, we came to think of infection as something only and inherently bad. So next, what's coming next is a meditation on infection and infectiousness. This text or this talk is dangerous. And not because the content is harmful to minors or offensive, like parental advisory on CD folders. The text and talk as such is not only harmful to minors and offensive, risk of infection, listen at your own risk, please send a consent form to my email address. In the medical context, contagion means the transmission of disease from body to body by direct or indirect contact. See, for example, contagion, from Latin contangere, to touch with. Here, contagion is characterized negatively as a contaminating communication, a transmission that gets dirty. Contagion is therefore met with quarantine, an attempt to contain the contaminating agent, to stop contact. It would be a mistake, however, to associate contagion solely with hygiene or disease. Contagion from disease or poor hygiene alone is a myth. Myths, for their part, are also contagious, and this, I think, points to the possibility of a cultural and aesthetic reading of contagion. Whoever writes a short text about the term contagion in these times need not be surprised if it becomes most precisely dateable and dated. But what the fuck? Sorry. Pardon my French. In this talk, I would like to detach the term contagion from the pandemic universe and make it fruitful for culture or literature. Thus, once again, this text is dangerous. No, I correct myself. This is only half the truth. every text is, qua text, contagious. As the philosophers William S. Burroughs and Laurie Anderson have stated, language is a virus. Every text is contagious and infected. Contagious precisely because it has always been infected. No text rose up in a quarantine universe, isolated with a safe distance. Every text is always already defenselessly at the mercy of other texts. Every text, and I read text here in Derrida's sense, is already infected by an unmanageable network of other texts. These in turn, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. The source of infection is an almost endless game and teeming of references, meanings, associations, resonances. The back and forth in hall of mirrors and echo chambers. It is not for nothing that the French word raisonner, to echo, is in unison with raisonner, to think, to ponder. Wordplay also has its place here, a kind of intertextuality in the smallest space. Note, the English word pun is probably derived from the Latin punctum, the punctum that Roland Barthes translates in his Camera Lucida as arrow, stab, or prick. Thus it could be that wordplay inoculates and partially immunizes every word against its own tendency to semantic calcification and unambiguity. In text, there are two visible features of this intertextual infection. First, there's the footnote. Footnotes are infections in the truest sense of the word. Post-its, refrigerator magnets. The infection is pinned to the label like a membership badge, but remains external. Direct quotation, on the other hand, signals a more difficult course. First, there is the footnote. Footnotes are infections in the truest sense of, no, we had that, sorry. Here is a sample. Again, I lost my text. Direct quotations, on the other hand, signal a more difficult course. Here a sample was virtually bitten out of a text and planted in a new text. The bite marks are clearly visible. No secret is made. Contagion guaranteed. The first bite of the world history, we remember Adam, brought knowledge into the world. And the computer with the bitten apple brought and brings bytes in circulation. Information goes viral. And this is not an apple, right? So it doesn't really work that fun here. All these contagions are visible for everyone. But as we all know, the contagions are not always named, remain unreported and undiscovered, so that the dark figures may be much higher than previously assumed. But not only every text is contagious and infected at the same time, all the readers and authors. I have caught Deleuze, for example. I got it from HB, name changed by the health department. He was my teacher, basically. Or rather, HB has not only infected me, but has turned me into an addict. Where HB got it from, I don't know. I suppose he got infected at the source, the texts of Deleuze. When quoting, biting off, the reader becomes the lector, maybe even the Hannibal lector, the cannibal senses regards, and sometimes even the lictor. In Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, the blind monk and monastic librarian Jorge of Burgos spreads poison on the upper right-hand page of the only copy of Aristotle's second book of Poetics, so that anyone reading the book and wetting his finger with his tongue to turn the page is poisoned. The danger of infection by the text is prevented by contagion touching the book. The licking of the book pages has thus, in this case, a more serious effect than the licking of a toad, which again, with certain toads, for example the Bufo alvarius, violates the narcotics law. If you kiss a toad, there's always a good chance that it will turn into a prince, even if it's only the mirage of one. Bufotenine triggers mild hallucinations. Which brings me back to the topic. Contagion alone is sometimes simply not enough. Sometimes it has to go deeper, and it does, as etymology teaches us. The word infection comes from the Latin inficere, literally to put in. So this is not about on in the German anstecken, but about in the German reinstecken. Thus footnote and quotation are only the mild course, only the attenuated variant of the actual reinstecken, einverleiben, incorporation. It is, so to speak, with Deleuze's idea of the machine, about plugging in. In writing, one only needs to know to which other machine the literary machine can and must be connected in order to function. To be connected to something, verbunden werden. In German, this sounds a bit aseptic. The English to plug in is more intensive, has more to do with our topic. And it is true not only for writing, but also for reading. There are two ways of reading a book. Either you look at it as a box that refers to an insight, and you will look for its signifiers, and you are even more perverse or depraved, you will go in search even of the signifier, or you read it in another way. You look at a book like a little asignificant machine. The only problem is, does it work, and how does it work? How does it work for you? If it doesn't work, just pick up another book. This other reading is a reading of intensity. Something comes across or doesn't come across. Something happens or doesn't happen. There is nothing to explain, nothing to understand, nothing to interpret. Andy Warhol once put it this way: once you got pop, you could never see a sign the same way again. And once you got pop, you could never see America the same way again. The double meaning of the small word get makes clear what this is about. It's not enough to get pop or whatever in terms of receiving it. You have to get it, what it's about, what it does or can do with you and you with it. Then it changes the point of view in action. Something comes across or doesn't. Something happens or doesn't happen. You have to get it. Don't explain, don't understand, don't interpret, get it. Infectious reading, get, can mobilize the forces working in the work so that these strengthens the forces in the reader. Then the work works for you. But if this is not the case, then throw the book into the corner and look for one where it works. Infection thus becomes a framing, a new frame of reference and action. Speaking of pop, Deleuze and Guattari's formula rhizomatics equals pop analysis becomes a shorthand against the one-sided fixation on text and discourse and for an opening to the most diverse materials of expression. Texts, yes, but also films, photographs, sound pieces, paintings, recordings, etc. A way out for language, for music, for writing. What is commonly called pop, pop music, pop philosophy, pop literature, Wörterflucht, as they call it. Using multilingualism in one's own language. With all the metaphorical talk about biting, licking, and sticking it in, the thought of a venereal disease is naturally not far away. Perhaps the aesthetic and cultural infection is a kind of syphilis, a transmission of pathogens. Michel Serre has been working on the theme of translation, transmission, intercourse, yes, even into the most intimate physical union, and their significance for what constitutes a highly technical civilization. He has concluded that the normal case of communication is precisely not the clean transmission of information between a sender and receiver, simply because everyone involved in a communication is involved in a network, contagious and always already infected. Syphilis would thus be the name for a kind of twisted philosophy, which makes clear that it can only arise in and from networks of multiplicities, not in pure dialogue or even by self-absorption, only by infecting and being infected. Dialectics operate on the pattern of descent, heredity, either or, but human and animal bands multiply by contagions, epidemics, battlefields, and catastrophes. Reproduction by epidemics, by contagion, has nothing to do with descent by heredity. The vampire does not reproduce, she infects. The difference is that contagion, the epidemic, brings into play quite heterogeneous terms, such as human, an animal, and a bacterium, a virus, a molecule, and a microorganism. And not only that, unlike Georg Wilhelm Friedrich's dialectic, where relations are always those between solid and fixed objects and or subjects, the idea of contagion touched upon here is about dynamic processes, about assemblages. To conclude with Marx, society does not consist of individuals, but expresses the sum of relationships, in which these individuals stand to each other. Society is not constituted by the individuals, but on the contrary, it is the expression of the sum of relations, co-contacts, contagions, in which individuals or individuals exist. These relations should not be understood as transcendent, but as immanent. To infect and being infected are immanent to society. From this point of view, it would also be absurd to say that life and literature, or art, music, and all the other arts, are immune to each other. Literature is not on one side and life on the other. It's a brutal Mexican standoff that makes it impossible to take the side of literature. It is not a matter of either or. One has to see that literature and life always infect each other, indeed have to infect each other. In May 2020, in the midst of the first big lockdown, I had the idea of conceiving an international arts project. Now comes the artsy part. A project related to the idea of infection, but also based on the pun of Ovid and COVID. And even when you wrote it, I mean, here I stopped it from happening, but what happens if you write it on Word, this COVID even turns into this with the copyright sign, right? So the whole idea of infection and what are you proposed to sample, copyright infringement laws, all basically forced their entry into that pun. With the larger idea to create positive antibodies, as we call it, so that art could attempt to become a healing force. I asked my sound friends, artists Lasse Marguerite and Thomas Körner, if they would like to jump on board, and both agreed. Thomas was a great sparring partner in the conception, and Lasse Mark was an incredible comrade in actually organizing all this. So basically, in the course of 18 months, we played 19 rounds of what you might call an intermediate version of the telephone game, right? Or what's the serious notion of the exquisite corpse, basically, was a kind of similar thing, right? So 19 rounds because of COVID-19, with 7 artists each. So we ended up with 133 international artists playing that in the course of 18 months. So, Ovid's Metamorphosis, a classic of world literature. Ovid's world is both a quest for an origin and a history of the world as a continuous metamorphosis. But that's not all there is to it. It is also a work of metamorphosis through violence. Change equals male aggression and dominance. This very myth underlies our Western culture, has influenced our thinking, our imagination for thousands of years. Nothing in this world that is not permeated, inspired, infected by this myth. Myths of violence correspond to the violence of the myth. Must this go on forever? Is the myth a virus that has infected us incurably? Or is it possible that COVID is actually the counter-event to Ovid, the pharmacon that immunizes us by infecting us in turn, promising an interruption of eternal recurrence? When Ovid opens his metamorphosis with the line, "I intend to speak of forms changed into new entities," it soon turns out that these changes are of an utterly violent kind. Women, abused, beaten, and raped, become aestheticized objects of a male gaze, of the lust of violent perpetrators whose actions are even, compared to the gentle touches of the wind, hence the category of love poetry. Yeah, so he always compares that to these motions of the wind. Defenders and lovers of ancient texts are quick to raise the reflexive objection that art should be considered from a purely aesthetic point of view and in its own time context. However, this argument is very dangerous, because if art closes itself off to current issues, its social relevance is put into question. And on the other hand, is it not rather the case that we still live in a largely patriarchal, hierarchically organized society, whose cultural patterns and structures, whose mechanisms of oppression and power are not so very different from those of antiquity? Has the cradle of culture, even after passing through the Enlightenment and political and social modernity, not left a lasting mark on our cultural code, on the eternal constitution of our neoliberal, post-postmodern, late capitalist society? Censorship then? Cancel culture? If so, there wouldn't be much left of the ancient text. We would be denied a potential for friction and conflict with our own traditions. Sexism in 2022-23 is not an isolated phenomenon, but a point in a millennia-old process. It is precisely through the heat of debate, due to the drastic nature of the material, that a climate of productivity might emerge, that a creative approach with a fresh perspective can become possible, for example by writing on, by changing the premises, etc. The ancient texts are brimming with politically incorrect content. Sweeping them under the carpet or trivializing them is fatal for our cultural and historical self-perception. Indeed, let them become part of a highly topical, explosive and relevant debate, or maybe not even of a debate. The binary either-or strategies of the grammar of debate and discourse are also part of this myth. Thus a change, a metamorphosis might be possible, but maybe only in a game. In real life, Logos speaks even through our playfulness. We think stately even when we play. For example, as musicians, as commanders of the instrument. Choose your instruments over which we command, just as we think we can command music itself, art, speech. The wish to live free of myth is also a myth, a wish that is understandable, justified, authorized by the power of myth. Thus freedom might only be possible in playing, in art, in the willful subversion of heteronormative discourses, if that is possible. But that is why we play, why we have to play, why we dare to play this game, and we call it Ovid's metamorphosis. It is a game with many participants. In the game, we let Ovid's myth fade away within us. The metamorphosis, this fading out of the myth, happens by the way of the game The Broken Telephone, or the surrealist cadaver excrete. It creates and designs series. We all know this broken telephone game, a children's game, a piece of cake. During the game, the participants, the more the better, arrange themselves in a row or a circle. One player thinks up a message. This message is then whispered from mouth to ear from one participant to the respective neighbor. The fun of the game results from its resolution, where the last one in the row speaks out loudly what was whispered into the ear of as the last message. The increasing falsification of the original message can be documented by each participant repeating the understood messages for all, which also increases the number of surprises. In times of Corona, this may not be played anymore, too little distance between mouth and ear. This game was also formerly known as Chinese whispers. Historians trace the European use of the word Chinese to describe confusion and incomprehensibility back to the earliest contacts between Europeans and the Chinese in the 17th century, and attribute it to the Europeans' inability to understand China's culture and worldview. The rather racist use of the expression Chinese whispers suggests the belief that the Chinese language itself is not understandable. Moreover, Chinese people have historically been stereotyped by Europeans as mysterious or inscrutable. And in the era of COVID-19, all of this takes an additional significance as Trump viciously and insensitively dubbed it the Chinese virus. The interplay of infection and information is at stake here. Information chains and sources of infection and the series in which information or meaning spreads, and it does so in spaces determined by the curators. The international participants come from the arts, from literature, music, video art, sound art, photography, etc. They are the actors, but it is their practice that gives shape to the forces and makes them tangible. The real agents are the transmission channels. The transmission paths, the infection paths between the hosts, the artists, are more than just a structure, and the mutations that run across them in the process are the real creators. The artists, once infected, simply do their thing. The metamorphoses happen in transmission, and our project makes them audible, visible, tangible. Ovid's metamorphosis creates series. It processes transformation in which what is said and meant is transformed through the media, text into image, image into sound, sound into thought, thought into form, form into substance, and back again. The transformations are substantial, as in Ovid's metamorphosis, in which mostly humans are transformed into a component of botanical, animal, mineral, or astral nature. Here's an example of a series. Artist Zero listens, a voice that speaks to her by the phone, or she is infected by news, newspapers, by a text, affected by what is happening. Maybe she can take notes, or she will have to remember it. She produces a text, a summary of what has been heard, and gives it to Artist 1, for example, in handwriting. Artist 1 visualizes this in a picture or series of pictures, painted photographies. Artist 2 reflects these into a video, movement, animation, tempo, duration, and sends this video to Artist 3 and Artist 4. Both Artists 3 and 4 create a soundtrack for the video. Artist 5 receives both soundtracks and picks them up to remix. Artist 6 receives the remix, describes the story this music tells her, the narrative, the time, the emotion, what touches her, what the sounds evoke, how it looks, how it feels, what symptoms it causes. Artist 6 calls Artist 0 again and gives her a detailed description of her symptoms on the phone, and Artist 0 takes note of what has happened in between the original message and the end result. So basically a multimedia version of that telephone game. This is just one example of a possible series. Different series produce different symptoms or expressions. In this example, we are producing a spoken message, written notes, 3 sound pieces, 1 image or image series, a video. At the beginning of this series, there is an artist who receives a message and then tries to make sense of it. And this is where the myth is written down, written with, written on. But this is also where it's starting to fade. This interstice creates a space for new myth, our myth, to resonate. At this moment of the game or project, this artist is patient 0. Adorno once called the new music of the avant-garde a true message in a bottle. This idea suggests a model of communication that moves beyond the histories of style and reception. Messages in bottles, however, were not only sent in the 20th century. In every epoch, it is the untimely ones who make use of them. In an interview, Deleuze picks up Adorno's phrase, and I quote, "The only communication we could want that is perfectly appropriate to the modern world is Adorno's model, the message in a bottle, or Nietzsche's model, the arrow shot by one thinker and picked up by another. Let COVID's metamorphosis begin." Attention. According and in parallel to the security measures, there will also be restrictions for the metamorphosis as equivalents to the rules of social distance, 2 meters distance, mouth protection, washing hands, etc. These conceptual security measures of the project aim at limiting the scope of action, justified by the necessity to concentrate on an aspect of the event under investigation. However, it is important to understand not only the limiting but also the liberating character of such measures. With these directional forces, we can conceptualize experimental systems that narrow the view but at the same time expand it. In a real experiment, the framing and the constituting factors do not determine the outcome. The whole, there is always more than the sum of its parts. In these assemblages, as Deleuze would call them, we are not dealing with fixed objects or with being, but with relations between processes, becomings, and as such not only with the actual but the virtual, the world of potentialities and multiplicities. Experimental systems are extremely tricky installations. They can be places of emergence, structures for capturing that which cannot be imagined otherwise. They are like spider webs in which you might catch something that you can't quite know what it is or exactly when it's coming. Experimental systems are arrangements to constitute unforeseeable events, generators of surprise or machines for making the future. The metamorphosis should not take place on the phenotype only, on the level of what's obvious, on the surface, out in the open. It should intervene in the code of the respective original, on the level of its DNA. Create variations, mutations, not thinly disguised imitations. Shapeshifters, not being but becoming, not but être but and. Thus shape-shifting here refers not to changing form from one form into another, but an almost topological stretching that taps into the dimension of the virtual, actualizing it in never-ending processes, copy and transform, and transform, and transform. Each project will last, so these were the safety measures, each project series will last the time of a quarantine, 14 days, which means each artist will have approximately 48 hours for her or his slot. Every artist has to adopt a self-chosen safety measure, a voluntary restriction in his or her approach. From infection to infection, we hope that antibodies can be created to counter the bad virus, so that in the end, in these cooperations, some cure might be visible on the horizon. Each artist should keep a short log, for example, at what time affected, in which safety measure taken, and so on, which is important for the documentation of the infection counter-infection chain. Please work quick and concentrated. Stick to your time slot, inspired and inspiring. Don't disrupt the infection chain. Yeah. And that was basically the kind of prompt that was sent to the artists, and basically they all got a slot of 48 hours, notwithstanding the different time zones, which basically meant that was not a thing that could be prepared in advance, but it was an actual improvisational thing to be going on. Yeah? And it all depended on the actual again, cooperation between this. So they had to get in touch and really stick to their thingy, right? And if time allows, I would like to at least introduce one of those series. And here the non-human makes its entry basically in maybe a different shape. Because it all started, so the myth that this group basically decided on to work with was the myth of Arachne in Ovid, right? So the first collaborator was the artist Thomas Saraceno, who basically does lots of recordings of different spiders. Yeah, so he basically creates all these three-dimensional spider webs, and not creates, lets them create and build in his studio, and makes recordings of these spiders basically. On the one hand, making the web or playing on the web like a string instrument. Yeah? So it started with this thing. So I hope. So that was the first, basically the trigger, which then was sent to two other sound artists. Where's that image? Image is gone. The first is Shira Lekman, an Israel classical pianist, basically, but who also works with electronics. So here the sound piece was, and I think you saw it, right? So this was the actual schedule, yeah? So artist one, so he was not, didn't listen to a voice on the phone, but actually got a prompt by email, right? And produced that sound piece and sends it to artists 1 and 2. Artists 1 and 2 translate that sound piece into a sound piece of their own and send both their pieces and the original piece to artist 3, and then it goes on. So it basically creates a kind of spider web of interconnections. So here we have Shira Lekman working with the original. So what you basically have is a mixture of that spider sound with electronically treated sounds of a weaving machine. Yeah? And the image which was here in the morning, which is gone, shows Shira at the piano, but at the same time a Webstuhl, a weaving machine. Yeah? So the same original was sent to Reinhold Friedel, who is maybe known as the artistic head of the Zeitkratzer ensemble, which is a German group that is specialized on experimental music. And he wrote in that blog that I got too much text and struggled to understand the impressive terms vibrational communication, biomaterionomics, animal ethology, non-human philosophy, anthropology, biodiversity, conservation, and its regrouping. But it came down to a simple description of a short MP3 that was sent. Title, Argiope aurantia plucking, spider web. It stated details like length, studio, etc., and culminated in a very pragmatic line, behavior plucking. I revisited Ovid, searched the text for plucking, and found Orpheus plucking the string of his lyre. He even died while doing so because the Ciconian women made so much noise that they couldn't hear his songs anymore. The stones also could not hear his songs anymore. His singing and plucking would not protect him anymore, so he was killed by stoning. An interesting opposition. The spider's plucking produces noise, while Orpheus' plucking of his instrument is not there anymore. The singing has gone. Like music left us during the pandemic. Orpheus is dead, spiders are plucking. So with that in mind, he created this one. As you maybe can speculate with it, so it's the original sound connected with electronic treatments of plucking a prepared piano, right? And these muffled sounds then, in a way, are overlaid here. So it's basically a spider plus a human spider playing at the same time. These three sounds then were sent to Rosie Braidotti in order to ask her to create a text based on that. So here's her log. The title is called That Cosmic Buzz. Date, duration as long as you can spin it. Composed at my computer. Name of the spider, Anna Covida. Web type, worlding. Behavior, buzzing. And then she wrote that short text, which we can maybe just read through. It's just only two more examples. That cosmic buzz. I have a thing with insects. Visually, they are cultural icons with a history of representation akin to the monstrous, the sacred and the alien that makes other species pale into insignificance. They trigger a range of effects that includes curiosity, horror, fascination, phobia, fear, and loathing. They have been alternatively rendered as creepy mutants, disgusting vermin, resilient survivors, tentacular evolutionary left-behinds, biblical plagues spelling the wrath of God, lazy parasites and dutiful laborers, tiny death machines and frugal industrial engineers. And then there are the Machiavellian masterminds in the shape of spiders. Sexually ambiguous, constitutively queer, insects titillate human understanding. The hyper-accelerated sexuality, rhizomic transspecies copulations with plants and flowers, their larval power of metamorphosis, the mimetism, the parasitism, the mutations, the viral qualities, the genetic recombinations, and the brevity of their lifespan amaze and intimidate humans. They evoke a reaction of attraction and repulsion, disgust and desire. Tiny miniatures, they exercise the same immense sense of estrangement as dinosaurs, improbable morphological constructs. They are hybrid par excellence. To even enter in contact with them, you need microscopic vision and ultrasound hearing. To actually be able to see and hear insects, humans need prosthetic enhancement through technologies which call for a metamorphosis of the sensory and cognitive human apparatus. Insects are for me figurations of post-anthropocentric becoming and point to post-human sensibilities and alternative sexualities. Becoming insect means becoming post-human, becoming imperceptible, becoming earth. They have that buzz. Spiders, synchronizing their body speed to the Earth axis, are masters at capturing the intense sonority of their elemental material spaces, to map them and process them outside the scope of human senses and cultural values. Insects are amazing music makers, machinic sound organisms, as removed from the mammals and therefore the humans as biologically possible. By insect music, I do not mean only the usual bodily noises that organisms make in moving about the planet, but rather the specific capacity to produce sounds that have speeds, variations, and intensities. Sonic variations that are immanently connected to the territory, the ecosphere, the time and day, the quality of the light, the temperature. Insects are masters of non-linguistic communication, including an acute sense of internal time. In this capacity, they are in closer to the technological apparatus than to actual animals, or rather situated in between, spinning their pathways with supreme disregard for the human sensorial system and social mores. They signal the imbrication of the organic with the technological. See, for instance, insectoid and arachnoid terminology that is so often used to describe advanced technologies, especially robots and virtual reality artifacts, but also swarms of information and algorithmic slithering. Cyberfeminists argue that the internet or computer-mediated future can only be arachnoidic or spider-like. It functions via lines, knots, connections, continuous relations. Thus, the discourse of arachnomancy can be used to explore possible evolutions of information technologies, their serial repetitions and procedural structure. Biotechnologies go even further in their arachnoidic paradigm. Researchers from the University of Wyoming have developed a way to incorporate spiders' silk spinning genes into goats, allowing the researchers to harvest the silk protein from the goat's milk for a variety of applications. Due to its strength and elasticity, spider silk fiber could have several medical uses, such as for making artificial ligaments and tendons, for eye sutures and for jaw repair. The silk could also have applications in bulletproof vests and improved car airbags. The reason why goats were mutated to perform the task of producing silky milk is that attempts at farming silk spiders have failed on any scale, mostly because spiders kept in close proximity can turn into infighting and cannibalism. Machiavellian embrained and embodied masterminds indeed. So maybe these goats would be something for, for your university. So the last part, and then we're done here. Becoming insect means embracing this kind of complexity, becoming immanent to a site-specific location, a territory, and learning to hear with the entire body. Insects are elemental, site-specific, tonic, and atmospheric entities. Essentially, they are about becoming imperceptible, becoming molecular, becoming Earth. Some are nuclear resistant. Music is cosmic, planetary, and non-human. Becoming insect as or in music is about delinking the perception and representation of the cosmos from its reliance on the rationality of an anthropocentric and humanistic European mathematical order. Indigenous cosmologies have been teaching this simple point for centuries. Sonic landscapes are liberated from this rationalist format and turned into a transversal space of molecular becomings. In post-human music, as a human analog of insect music, time can be heard and silence becomes perceptible. It is a pure, non-representational form of time, framed through the mediation of enhanced rhythm. Insect music, technologically mediated, denaturalizes and dehumanizes the time sequence. It can push speed and pitch to post-human heights, but it can also fade them to pre-human depth of inaudibility. As an intransitive activity, post-human sonic landscapes dissolve the boundaries between species and locations. This process of polyphonic hybridization projects multiple sonic interferences, virtual soundscapes, and cross-species encounters. How to make us hear the inaudible, the imperceptible, that roar which lies on the other side of silence, is what is at stake in this process. Ultimately, it returns us to the earth. It is about becoming imperceptible. That is the point of fusion between the self and their multiple ecologies of belonging, the milieus and the cosmos as a whole. It sustains affirmative interconnections that construct a heterogeneous assemblage called the self. Ultimately, all one has is what one is propelled by, namely affects. But these molecular relational interdependencies are invisible and inaudible. They are the stuff the world is made of. It is the quiet, persistent buzz of non-human life living on, regardlessly. Right? So that was here our connection to the spiders, to the sonic landscape. This is what Rosie then composed her text on. And these sounds plus the text then were sent to both a filmmaker and another sound artist, and they were to produce a short film and a soundtrack. And in order not to play one after the other, I have already spliced them into one. So, and again, I don't know where the pictures are. Something doesn't work here. So the filmmaker is called, I never know how to pronounce his name, Carl Doing or Carl Doing. I like both. Doing is a great sound and doing is what he does, right? So Carl, whatever. So he used mostly film techniques that don't involve a camera. Yeah, so basically putting objects onto the film itself in order to create images. And at the same time, Dalibor Kocian from Slovakia, also known as Stron, worked on a soundtrack to a film he had not yet seen. Yeah? So basically they had the same prompts in order to come up with a visual piece and an audio piece. Yeah? So he describes here how he basically chose his safety measures. So by using Ovid's birth and death dates as the framework for the frequency ranges and things like that. Also the original sounds. All the sounds were laid out in spider-shaped form along tracks in Ableton Live. At the beginning, the sound of the spider's legs. So everything is coming in here. And since we had both the short film and the short music piece, as I said, I put them together in this last but one thing that I wanted to show. that was will. Basically, the last but one station in that series. So after that, there was again a very short text by Michael Marder, a philosopher who writes a lot about plant worlds and things like that. So in a way, we don't have to read that whole log. Basically, in his piece, he wanted to maybe the last paragraph here. He wanted to create a kind of equivalence between For Arachne, which is a piece for for a spider, the title imitating in part Beethoven's Für Elise, right? Which basically creates that simultaneity between the human and the non-human world. So For Arachne, a few threads to follow. Slowly you start pulling a thread out of yourself, or better, you keep pulling on it, since there is no beginning and no end in sight. Silken strings of letters, warps and wefts, sleaze and grammar, sounds and syllables, words and yarn, vibrations, resonances, echoes upon echoes, not forgetting the gaps, the silences, however tight the weave, however high the thread count. It is the thread on which you are already hanging either by your neck or by the belly or by the stem, transformed into a tendril, surviving yourself, living on beyond yourself. Do you need a shuttle traveling across a loom to spin your textile, to compose your text, your musical score? A page filled with pencil strokes, a computer screen traversed by a cursor? Or will the movements of your body-mind seamlessly organize in space and in time, the yarn and the vibrations flowing out of you? Animalize your art, your thought, your perception. Vegetalize and elementalize them. Let them grow and decay out of you. Allow them to sprout from your meristems, to be secreted from your spinneret glands. Whatever is done to you, whatever you do, you will dangle on a cord, forming together with it a pendulum of sorts, which, as your mind-body sways back and forth, will mark the rhythms of your existence. You are your very own wall clock without a wall to lean upon. Everything you do amounts to embroidering on the thread you are barely hanging by. Too narrow to make a cloth, too wide to melt into nothing. While the cord is one, the filaments comprising it are many, all of them intricately interwoven among themselves and within the emptiness in between. It may seem that the height of your thought, of your art, and indeed of your existence is in deftly matching one thread with another. But the true skill is in combining threads with non-threads, interweaving the nothing that you will have been and the nothing that you will have become with the something that you still are. The tearing of the thin vegetal or animal fiber that holds you is not an event waiting to happen in an indefinite time to come. The rupturing has already happened, if imperceptibly so. Your neck or belly or stem is cut loose. Freedom, and yet you insistently pull on this apparently endless silk or cellulose fiber you are spinning and spinning over the abyss. The dexterity of your 10 fingertips, the work of your 6 spinneret glands, the probing movement of your countless root tips flirt with disaster, past and future. The grace of body-mind motions, like beauty itself, derives from the nothing this mind-body is about to become. Whoops, sorry. That was the last one. Sorry. Derives from the nothing this mind-body is about to become, from its fragility that is only frail and pitiful when seen from the side of pure being. What is beautiful is how your finitude, being the end and at the same time being beyond the end rather than coming to an end, is woven into the arts of your existence, whether daringly or without a smidgen of heroism. You are more divine in your vegetality and animality than the self-assured, perfect and perfectly immobile gods. You had ripped your textile up well before the jealous goddess has torn it apart. From time immemorial, you have come across your string of protein or vibrations or words torn and have still continued pulling on it, spinning and weaving with it regardless, generating works of unspeakable beauty. You express, literally pressing out of yourself, a frayed filament and damaged thought, mutilated desires and grating sounds, an injured, traumatized body-mind. Soon enough, the lattice work of expressions becomes your world, hanging by a thread, just as you yourself are. Nothing else matters, and least of all your origins, whence you come or grow. Nor does it matter from whom you've learned to express this threadbare existence of yours. The only thing of consequence is what you do with the undoing and with the undone. This is sufficient to survive, not in the sense of a privation, but in the sense of an excess. To linger in a field of fluid shape-shifting vitality beyond a life reducible to particular organic forms. The sufficiency in question overflows autonomy, even though for all intents and purposes you survive on yourself alone. Expressing, pressing out, you pull the other from within yourself, metamorphosing little by little in every single moment with every bit of thread that comes out. There is no decisive, shocking and sudden metamorphosis because your shape is always already another one, distinct from the one in which you and the others around you capture whatever passes for your being and for your nothing. You have become a spider and the tree she is dangling from and the ground in which this tree grows before divine wrath has struck you. In fact, this wrath is unsparing, with its unsparing pity, did not strike you. You were already elsewhere, otherwise, having nothing to do with the accident of your birth. Transported elsewhere thanks to your skill, above all. Your art vegetalized, animalized, elementalized. Slowly, lowly, oly, yeah. And that then was in return sent to Thomas Saraceno again, and he responded with that picture, which is in a way, so to me it first looked like as if that was a spider web within a telescope or something like that. I don't know if that is, or if he managed to overlay these two things. But this basically turns the spider web into a universe of its own. I found that immensely beautiful, right? And his log was that, amid the hills and galaxies, starlight exposure, she sews together earth and sky to illuminate the night and help wandering beings find their path. Please remember that baser passions could interrupt her balance of ecosystemic forces when asking your question. Yeah. And that then basically was the, how would you call it, the series come full circle. Yeah? And yeah, that was only one example of 19 different things in that, which I think there's really, just in because of the fact that basically, I mean, 48 hours also included your sleeping time. Yeah, so basically you had one day to do that. Yeah, and that of course is not in terms of big production value, but a kind of improvised reaction to the triggers that you got and this circulation network that was built up with each series. And yeah, that's the thing I just wanted to present to you today. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for a very joyful talk and wonderful presentation of this artistic experiment. And I have a simple yet a very difficult question. How would you conceive of lack? Because you presented a worldview that is based on joy, abundance, of connections, where even global pandemics makes possible artistic experiments, new connections, and stuff like that. However, what we experienced during the lockdowns, but also what we experienced during the economic crisis that followed the COVID-19 pandemics, was precariousness, scarcity, and multiple forms of lack. And obviously, in Deleuze and Guattari, it's all about abundance of connections. They hate the very concept of lack, and in Mille Plateau, instead, they speak about black holes. Where even fascism is a kind of artificial black hole. So I wonder, another conceptualization of lack we can find in Marx
and so on and so forth. So I wonder what would be your view of lack? How would you explain the very possibility of lack?
I would even maybe put the question even broader. Maybe not only lack, but what about the dark side of that all, which in a way corresponds with that, right? And I think this is also why I chose that series, because lack, nothingness, all these things are also addressed in most of the pieces. So it's not that this is something which does not figure at all. Yeah, and I think one of my answer, which of course is also again an answer related to that conceptual system, and maybe not so much to the real world. And I know you wanna drag me out there, but I think there's a difference if you say that it's all about relations and whatever, and that you say that all these relations necessarily have to be good. That's not the thing. Yeah. So of course, lack, the relation to lack and the relation to that darkness is always part of that. And as Michael Marder put it in his, which I found really beautiful text, where he says that you have to weave the nothingness into that. Yeah. So it's basically trying to forge a relation to that without saying it does not exist. How that works, I think, is always a matter of. For example, in that thing, is a matter how you individually respond to that. But that doesn't answer your question in terms of how do you conceive of let's say, the reality of precariousness and things like that. That's more a conceptual view that I'm just trying to interweave into my answer. As for the real world scarcity, I don't know. I mean, again, with relation to the project, that was also the thing that the people who contributed here, of course, they were lacking their jobs. Yeah, so there was a very realness to that situation of I don't have any jobs, I don't have any money, and that is why I value it even more than I already do now. And nonetheless, they said, okay, but this is at least a way where. Basically, our talents, in a way, are not wasted in that time. So that we can do basically projects. I mean, it's not only that they didn't have jobs, but also no interactions between the fellow artists, right? So that was a way to even situated in the real background of scarcity. That this, in a way, still was a way to create abundance or art or joy, or whatever you would call that. Right. So that's not a real answer. That's just an answer within the scope of that project. And this is not a political project in that sense, but basically a project that tried to almost serve on that network capabilities that were at the same time there and not there. Yeah? So networks were there, but you shouldn't use them because otherwise you get infected. So all this playing with concepts was part of that. Yeah.
I have just one comment to add, because obviously my question was conceptual, and I can give you a counter-example. What if you stick to Lucretius' De Rerum Natura instead of its metamorphosis? And in Lucretius, you have the whole world view where you can, conceptualize even a plague in Athens and in a very beautiful way, despite it was enormous tragedy.
Then you wouldn't have the beautiful pun.
Yeah.
Because Lucretius and Ovid are so far from, so you can't really work with that. But of course, sure, there's also another thing would have been the Decamerone or whatever. So there's a couple of let's say conceptual blueprints or whatever on which this would have worked, maybe in different ways, but that was just the obvious choice for us to do it like that.
I have just a very mundane question, really, which is, or the first question is just: are they available somewhere? Are they online?
Maybe pose the two questions.
Yeah. Well, the second one was my attempt to make that sound slightly more intellectual, which is sort of what was the kind of the sort of audience response, or the sort of contagion beyond the cycle of the six artists. Was there much engagement after that?
So far not, because the thing is, basically the last thing was played what was that? Beginning of last year. And since then, I've been trying to find sponsors for doing, because what I wanted to do is, of course, a simple way would have been to put that online, but that would have been, in a way, I would have felt bad with only for the artists if they did that and then you just have something in the cloud, right? So the idea was, and we're working on that, and we're close to releasing it, I hope in July or August, a big book which contains all the graphic artwork, the text, the logs, plus 2 DVDs, plus 7 CDs in a beautiful box. Right, and then the thing is that, of course, all the close to 150 artists will all get a free copy, and with the rest, with selling the rest, we would like to cover at least, because it's fucking expensive. And then you have not only the thing, but also postage for 150 people spread in Nigeria, Asia, wherever. Right, so it's not only Western Europe. Yeah? And that'll kill me. And I've put almost all of my expenses in that, because I simply thought you need to do that. That would be really unfair to all the people, right? So I'm hoping that maybe at least I get a small share of the expense, because the thing was that you couldn't get university funding because this is not academic. And I couldn't get artists funding because I'm not an artist, right? So wherever I asked, they basically said, no, you're not part of the team, you're not part of the club, right? Which basically meant, okay, so I had to ask private investors, and some did a little thing, but the largest part will be my savings. No, whatever, kidding. But that's, as I said, it's being done at the moment, and I guess June, July, it's gonna come out. So if you're interested, let me know.
Maybe one more follow-up question. Just wonder what's the resistance in it. In the whole project, of course, I get it that right. The very project was kind of response right. to the set conditions of lockdowns
right.
and
victims of it. But that's already answering your question. It was a resistance in terms that it combined artistic and as I thought, joyful affects, because that, I mean, I can tell you that every month when we played around, I was like it's Christmas. I was waiting for the results to come in, and when I shared that with the other people, at least in the group, they were also like, whoa, because they didn't know what the others were doing, right? So that was always a moment of, oh, no, we're getting a kind of reward that we've waited for, right? And that created, at least always for these small moments, created immense amount of joyful energy. Let's put it like that. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And the resistance, of course, is not. I mean, in some of the rounds you have. I mean, like here you have maybe call it a resistance to an anthropocentric worldview. You have other. Basically, every group is not from the beginning, but in its development, it turns out or emerges a certain focus that everybody is somehow trying to come to terms with. Yeah? Be it questions of gender, be it questions of blackness, things like that. And that was something which was not there from the beginning, but in the development of how people reacted to what they got. So they said, okay, so this is so much about voodoo, so there's blackness in there, and then so there was always an emergence of a topic which also had political significance, right? But the main idea of resistance was exactly that this project tried to set something against these rigid conditions, and even by playing them, not so much by saying fuck you or whatever, but using the same kind of channels which were in order to restrain you, to make something grow out of that. It always sounds so utopian and romantic, but that's basically the thing that.
Well, thank you. You explained your point, and I will, in return, explain you the background of my question. And I see a big difference between resistance and resilience, because resistance needs to be always subversive, whereas resilience is about keeping you alive, being able to survive unbearable conditions, but it doesn't problematize the very environment, social, economical, cultural, it rather affirms it or preserves it. Whereas resistance needs to be somehow, at least as I see it, as the anarchist theory perceives it, needs to be somehow subversive. And you were talking about it, this subversive part of it. Yeah.
And I think we talked about this resilience, the problematics of resilience, like 2 days ago, where I also said, and this is also reflected in that for me resilience also has that creeping back into isolation, something like that, because it basically means I'm resilient. I encapsulate myself against everything else. But here it's the exact opposite, right? So it's not an encapsulation, but opening up to other forces and seeing how they respond to each other, right? So also on that level, it's not resilience, but maybe more resistance. Yeah. Hey. Hi there. Yeah, we're finished already. Yeah, so late.
Okay, so the audience came when the lecture is over. Good timing.
Good timing, right? Now for the beer. No, but just kidding. Yeah, right.
So we just came for the applause.
Yeah, right. No, but I think you're right. Not right. It's basically, I think we totally agree on that level, that this is something that we even went so far calling resilience something almost like proto-fascist tendencies, right? Yeah. Because I think it's a difference if you say that whatever an ecosystem or whatever is resilient, or if you say a person can be resilient. That's a totally different thing. In an ecosystem, resilience is based actually on the interplay of a whole ecosystem. That's why it's called ecosystem. But for an individual to be resilient is for me basically this armorization of oneself. Not to get in touch with other forces, tendencies, things like that, but to stay as closed as possible.
And to put it in Deleuzean terms, would you claim that resistance is deterritorializing, whereas resilience is reterritorializing, making possible to...
Yeah. At least in that respect that I said, that is this encapsulation, of course, basically it's like closing off the borders. It's the same thing. Yeah. I would.
Then, okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here.
And now we can head for beer.
Right.